Who? God. And who? Adam. And who? Eve. And then that's like the first major story we hear about. And they corrupt the earth. And they're evil. But it's okay. God helps them. And then we hear about the story of who?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. And then who? Noah. And then who comes next? Abram. Okay, turn to chapter 12. We're going to read about this man. This is the first time we hear about him. And right off the bat, his story gets kind of crazy, y'all. As soon as he's introduced into the Bible, his story gets crazy. And we're going to read verses 1 through 4. And someone else is going to read it. I'm not going to read it.
Now the whole earth. Oh wait, this is okay. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old.
Okay, so right off the bat, what do we find out about Abram?
God talks to him.
God talks to him. What else?
He's 75.
I can't hear you.
75.
He's 75.
He's 75. He's an old man in our minds. Okay, what else about it?
He has to leave the country.
He has to leave. God is asking him to take up all his stuff and get out. Okay, what else?
God made a lot of promises to him.
God made some promises to him. What's the promise we see here that God made?
All the nations of the world shall be blessed.
Alright, all the nations are going to be blessed through Abram's descendants at this point. Which Abram will eventually become Abraham. But right here, we find out that God has chosen him, and all the families of the whole earth are going to be blessed through him. And so, what does Abram do?
Leaves.
Verse 4. So Abram went. He didn't wait around. He didn't ask questions. Abram got up and he went. So immediately we see an act of faith from Abram, and we know Abram's going to be this cool guy, and he's doing what God has asked him to do. Now let's go to verses 10 through 20. No, we're not going to read verses 10 through 20, but we get to verses 10 through 20. And what does Abram do?
He goes to Egypt.
Y'all have heard this story. Chapter 12, verses 10 through 20. What happens to Abram?
Goes to Egypt.
He travels to Egypt and does what?
Lies.
He lies. What does he lie about? His wife. Alright, so he goes up, and basically he's afraid, because he's afraid that he thinks his wife is beautiful, and she probably was. And so he's afraid that Pharaoh is going to see his wife, and that the Egyptians are going to see his wife and kill him so they can have her. I know, it sounds pretty brutal, but that's what's going down. And so Abram says to his wife, "Tell them you're my sister," which is kind of gross. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want people knowing that, my sister, we're hanging out all the time. But anyway, so Abram tells him and his wife that she is his sister. And that goes on for a little while, and Pharaoh calls to Abraham. Verse 18, someone read verse 18, and 19, and 20.
The Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why do you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here's your wife, take her and go." Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away, with his wife and all that belonged to him.
Okay, so what happens? in the next couple of verses.
Gets kicked out.
He gets kicked out. Why?
Lied.
Because he lied, and Pharaoh figured it out. So Abram's not so sneaky like he thought he was. He's not going to get to hang out in Egypt with his sister when it's his wife. Pharaoh figures it out, and he says, look, just take your wife and go. We don't want you here. So then we get to chapter 13. And Abram is with his nephew, what's his name? Lot. And they're forced to separate from each other. They've been hanging out together. They've been living pretty close. And all their stuff was together. Their livestock and everything they owned, they were together. And they're forced to separate. So why? Somebody tell me why. Oh, somebody back here. Why is Abram and Lot separated? Nobody knows?
Weren't there shepherds arguing?
The shepherds argued. Well, their livestock were fighting, and they knew that they couldn't survive if they stayed together. So Abram just comes and says, "Look, we've got to get away from each other." Let's go to verses 8 and 9 of chapter 13.
For we are brothers, not the whole man for you, but part country. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left.
Okay, so Abram says, which is pretty crazy. They've got all this land, and Abram says, "Look, we can't be together. We've got to get away. So how about you pick where you want to go?" And so Abram's basically saying, you can have what's better, and I'll take whatever's left. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. And this has got to be hard for him because it's his nephew, and he loves his nephew. But they've got to get away from each other. And their herdsmen and their livestock, everybody's got to get away and separate so they can all survive. And so Lot chooses, verse 12 and 13. Let's see where Lot chooses to go.
Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord.
Okay, so Lot chose where? Sodom. He went to the place where Sodom was. And this was what do we learn about Sodom? Verse 13.
Right, wicked.
It's wicked. So Lot chooses the side with the wicked land. And it may have been the better land, but it was also wicked. So Abram gives him that land, and Abram goes the other direction and gets away from there. Now verses 14 through 16, we'll read there. Someone read that.
The Lord said to Abram after Lot departed from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are, and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone counts dust, then your offspring can be counted."
Okay, your descendants will be like what?
Yeah.
Dust. Can anyone in here count dust? No. So Abram's going to have these crazy amount of descendants, and his nation's going to be blessed. And this is God coming in again and reiterating the fact that He's going to bless all nations through Abram at this point still. And so he keeps giving these promises, and he tells Abram to do what?
Look around.
To look around, and we didn't read that first. Now, read verse 17 and see what God tells Abram to do. Jason, how about reading verse 17 loud and clear for us?
What verse?
Chapter 13, verse 17.
Arise, walk through the land. For I will be with you.
Okay, so he tells him to rise up and walk. And Abram does what? He does what God said. Time and time again, Abram continues to do what God has told him to do. So now we get to chapter 14, and the story starts to take a turn. And Lot chose what land?
Wicked land.
Sodom, a wicked land. And now Lot is in danger. And so Abram is going to go and save them. And so Lot took all his stuff, and Abram convinced him to take his stuff up and leave. And Lot does that, does what Abram tells him to do because he listens to him. He, like we are in a lot of ways, although he left his sin, he left this wicked place, he goes back. And we'll get back to that in a minute. And then we go to chapter 17. Go over to chapter 17. Now someone read verse 5.
No longer will you be called evil. Your name will be Abraham. Why have we your father many nations?
Okay, so God comes to him again and says, this time, no longer are you Abram, now your name is Abraham. And I made you the father of many nations. So God comes again, basically saying his promise again, that he's going to use Abram to bless all nations. Abraham now changes his name to Abraham. So we keep going in chapter 17. And in verses 15 and 16 of chapter 17, his wife gives him a new name too. Someone read verses 15 and 16.
And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah. I will bless her and also give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. King of people shall be her.
Okay, so what did God just promise? He changed Sarai's name to Sarah, and he promises him what? A son. And that doesn't sound too crazy to us, but let's keep reading and see what's going on. So I'm going to read verses 17 through 19.
And Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? But Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Then God said, No, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him.
Alright, so God promised Abraham a son. And how does Abraham react? He laughed. And not only did he laugh, but the verse in my Bible says that then Abraham fell on his face and laughed. So I don't know what he was doing. I don't know if he just like plopped down on the ground or like jumped up and just belly flopped on the ground and just started dying laughing. And I don't know, have your parents ever told you to do something and you start laughing? No? Sergio's great. So, well, sometimes your parents tell you to do stuff, and it's just, you don't know why. Like, take out the trash. Nobody wants to take out the trash. I mean, that's not fun, but sometimes we're told to do that. And, or maybe clean the bathroom. Anybody ever had to clean the bathroom? Yeah, it's pretty gross. And sometimes we just laugh. Like, I'm not cleaning the bathroom, what are you talking about? But they told you to do it. You have to do it anyway. But here, Abraham is told that he's going to have a son. Now, what's so funny? Like, why is he laughing so hard? Huh? He's old. How old is he?
100.
He's 100 years old. And his wife's how old? 90. Man, that's some old people to be having some kids. And this is going to be their first child. They've never been able to have kids. And now all of a sudden, God says, I'm going to give you a son. And so Abraham just thinks it's funny. And we go on. It sounds crazy to us. Sounds crazy to them. And once again, God is going to establish a covenant for all his offspring. He says it again, that through his son, his new son, he's going to bless all the nations of the earth. Again. So, now, off the son thing and back to Lot. We get to chapter 19, verse 15 of chapter 19. What's going on? Somebody read it.
With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished.
Woo. So, this city's going to be punished. And this time, it's not Abraham telling him to leave, it's some angels telling him to leave. I don't know about you, but if an angel came to me and said, you need to leave, I'd probably freak out and leave. But Lot, he doesn't really want to leave. He's loving this wickedness that he's part of. And in verse 16, somebody read that first little part.
But he lingered.
But he lingered. Man, why are you lingering, Lot? Come on, get with the picture, get with the program. Let's get the moving. And so Abraham goes to bat for him, and he tries to later on in a couple of chapters later. Abraham tries to save this country, and he says, "If I can find this many people, will you save them? If I can find this many people, can I save them?" And he goes all the way down to 1. And God says, look, you can't find anyone, pretty much. I'm going to destroy the city. So and he allows Abraham to get Lot out of there. And then we get to the end of chapter 19, and God destroys Sodom. And Lot's wife does what? We all know what Lot's wife did.
Turn back.
She turns back. She turns into what? A pillar of salt. And so God promised them that he was going to destroy the city, and they needed to get out.
It was for the sake of 10 righteous men.
Yeah,
Find 10.
right. 10 men. He couldn't find the amount that he said he was going to find. And so now Abraham and Lot have left. Lot's wife is now a pillar of salt, and they're on their way. So we get back to chapter 21, and let's read verses 1 and 2 and 3. Yeah.
And the Lord visited Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived, and bore Abraham a son in his old age, and at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah had borne to him, Isaac.
Okay, so Isaac is born. And God, my verse says, in verse 1, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And once again, God has followed through with his promises. And we've seen it time and time again this weekend that God always follows through with his promises. And this time, God has done something pretty miraculous. A 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman who've never been able to have kids have now had a son. And then we get to chapter 22. They've been waiting all this time to have kids. Y'all have all heard this story, but I want to look at it real close. They've been waiting all this time to have a kid. And then we get to chapter 22. And someone read verses 1 and 2.
Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. And God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about.
Man, 100 years they waited for a son, or a child, any child. They just wanted a child. And they waited 100 years, and then God tells them to do what? Sacrifice him. Kill him. And that sounds crazy to us. Man, can you imagine having to kill your lovely dog or something like that to save yourself? Now that'd be crazy. And God is saying, Abraham, look, I need you to go sacrifice your son. I need you to offer him up as a sacrifice and to me. So now let's read verses 3 through 6. Someone who hasn't read yet.
Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took him to his servant and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out in the distance. He said to his servant, "Stay here and donkey while I and the Lord go over there. We will worship and then come back to you." Abraham took the wood for an offering, but the place on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire in the night. As the two things were to come together, Isaac spoke up and his
Stop there. Okay. So, what does verse 3 say right off the bat? The very beginning of that verse. Do what?
He woke up early and got ready.
He woke up early. Abraham didn't wait around and say, well, I'm going to follow God's promises. A little bit later, God's promised me so many things. He's always followed through. He's going to bless my nation. He said he's going to do it through Isaac. Surely he doesn't really want me to kill him. I'll do it later. But instead, he rose up early in the next morning, immediately, and he went. And he went to where God told him to go. And it says that he went up, took the wood and burnt offering, laid it on Isaac's son, and they took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. Now, what do you think Isaac's probably thinking at this point?
What are we going to sacrifice?
What are we going to sacrifice? Like, Dad, where's our sacrifice? We're just walking around, just me and you, and we're going up to this mountain to sacrifice something, but we don't have anything to sacrifice. So, what are we going to sacrifice? And then, in verses 7 and 8, let's read verses 7 and 8.
Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said. "The word is the lamb for the burnt offering." Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering with him." And the two went together.
Okay, so Isaac asked just what we just said he would ask. He says, "Father, where is the offering?" If we're going to offer something, we might want to get something to offer. And Abraham answers in verse 8. How does he answer? God will provide. Look, son, don't worry about it. God's always kept his promises for us. So just have faith. God's going to provide for us. And then we keep going. Verses 9 through 12. And the story gets pretty crazy as we keep going. Someone read verses 9 through 12.
When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham reached out his hand for the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here am I." And he said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me."
Okay. So, Abraham lays his son on this altar. And what did your version say he was going to do to him? Slaughter him. Now that's not just murder, that's not sacrifice, it's not kill. That's pretty intense. I'm going to slaughter him. So Abraham's going to slaughter his son Isaac, and all of a sudden, what happens? What? An angel. An angel comes out of nowhere and stops him and says, "Do not lay your hand on the boy." Why? Why does it stop him? He passed the test. So Abraham is put to the test and he's able to pass it. And because he did what God said. Now let's read verses 13 and 14.
The And
Abraham
Abraham
looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place the Lord will provide, and to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord there will be provided.
So, just like Abraham told his son earlier, he knew what God had promised. He knew that God was going to bless his nation, all the nations, through Isaac, and through him. And God does provide. God provides what? A lamb that they found in the thicket. And they sacrificed it. Now, this is where we're going to look at Abraham. Abraham was asked to do something really crazy. He was asked to go to a place and sacrifice his son. And if God doesn't come through for Abraham, what happens? Abraham's going to be crushed. Abraham's going to lose his only son that he waited 100 years for. None of us know what 100 years feels like. That's a long time. But if God does not come through for Abraham, he loses everything. And his son means so much to him, but he's going to have to lose it. But Abraham puts his faith in God that God will come through for him. And he goes to this place where he's afraid, he's scared, he's probably sad, upset, but he has faith that God's going to come through. Now let's go to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Let's read verses 1 and 2.
Therefore I urge you, brothers, and you on God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve that God's will is good and perfect will.
Okay. So it says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Now those of us who are Christians, when you're baptized, you are promising to God to do His will. And how do we sacrifice our lives for God? Adam.
We change them, modify them to what the Bible says, giving up a lot of our ways.
Give up a lot of our ways. What else? What else do we do to show God that we're sacrificing our lives for Him? What kind of things can we do? Huh? We have to be like Abraham. God went through with all His promises, and God has promised us that if we'll stay faithful to the end, He'll give us what? Crown of life. And part of staying faithful is presenting ourselves as a sacrifice. And that means doing just like Abraham. Going to places where we're uncomfortable. Going to places and putting ourselves in such a situation that if God doesn't come through for us, then we're done. Putting ourselves out there. Going places where, like I said, if God doesn't come through for us, we're done. Now, if you knew that no matter what you did, God was going to be there for you, what are you going to do? You do crazy stuff. You're going to go and you're going to tell everybody. You're going to go into places where you may feel threatened. You're going to go and risk your life for God because you know that God is with you. And those are the kind of things we need to do as Christians. We need to get up, and I talk about this a lot. We need to get out of our comfort zones, and we need to go somewhere where we're uncomfortable, where we feel threatened, and teach God's Word. And in the end, God's always going to come through with His promises. and we'll be blessed with eternal life. So my challenge to you today is to follow through with your promise. God's doing His part. Now it's your turn. So when we leave camp tomorrow, let's get out of our comfort zones and let's go and let's teach people. Let's go and let's go places where we may have never thought to go before. Let's talk to people who maybe we've never talked before because we're afraid and we're scared, and we know that if God doesn't come through, we're done. But let me promise you this, if you are faithful, God is going to come through every time. But you have to give Him a chance to come through. If you don't put yourself out there, if you don't take a risk, you're not giving God a chance to come through. So let's follow through with our promise. Thank you.